joining us right now, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, former presidential candidate, brand new fiction book out, a DC thriller called Duplicity. He also hosted a documentary called Rendezvous with Destiny, produced by our executive producer, Heather Hunter. Of course, Rendezvous with Destiny talks about Ronald Reagan and how he was the right man at the right time to save America, if not the world. Thanks for joining us, Newt Gingrich. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, I would love for you to sort of take the ball and run with it there with regard to that intro having to do with Ronald Reagan, his rendezvous with destiny. How did the late First Lady Nancy Reagan factor into that rendezvous?
Well, Nancy Reagan was extraordinarily important at almost every level. First of all, her father was a very influential conservative, and much of Reagan's conservatism, I think, came out of his relationship with her father and their conversations. Reagan had become an anti-communist before he met Nancy, but he really became much more firmly conservative on domestic policy and taxes and what have you by knowing her dad. Second, she was totally supportive of him. She was supportive of him in the movies. She was supportive of him when he ran for governor. She was supportive of him in the two presidential campaigns. And remember, there were some pretty scary things when he got shot in 1981. And she was really worried because she loved him totally. They had one of those almost fairy tale romances. And to some extent to the exclusion of their children and everybody else. I mean, they formed a little bond between the two of them that was just enormously tight. I was always struck when we were filming Rendezvous, did some of the filming up at the Reagan Ranch, and there's a very comfortable chair next to a telephone, and she would sit for hours and talk to all of her girlfriends in Hollywood because she really didn't want to be at the ranch. She really liked being down in Hollywood and doing things and going out to lunch. But she loved Ronnie, and Ronnie loved the ranch. And so as part of his mental health and his physical health, you know, she wanted to be totally supportive. So when he wanted to go to the ranch, they went to the ranch. But it was never a place that she personally would have picked voluntarily. And it just gave you a flavor of how much they were dedicated to each other. There's a scene where Reagan has been away too long on an official trip and turns to his staff and says, "I have to get back to Nancy.
Yeah,
we're leaving tonight." And it's just, you know, that sense that he was renewed, he relaxed, he felt comforted when he was with Nancy, and he was always a little bit edgy when he wasn't.
You know, as somebody who's covered events on the stage in Washington since about 1986, you often are asked questions about, well, what is so-and-so really like? You know, people ask me, what's Newt Gingrich really like? And I'm wondering, for you, could you just tell people what Nancy Reagan was just really like when you were just one-on-one with her?
Well, she's very smart. She was very alert, very involved. She understood the importance of her role as First Lady and then later her role as the carrier of the Reagan legend and developing the library. She did many, many things at the library in a way that was very, very positive. She was at times remarkably human. I called her one day just because a mutual friend said, you know, she's out there, she's helping the president. He is declining with Alzheimer's. It's very difficult. So I just called her out of the blue one day when I was speaker, and we chatted for a while, and she said, you know, it is such a terrible disease, because you're looking at somebody who looks like they're exactly the person you've lived with your whole life, and then you look in your eyes and you realize that they're not there anymore. And she had that ability to talk at a very human level. I mean, I found her to be very approachable. Now, she was tough. She had a real sense of class. Mm-hmm. It was a Hollywood style, not a Washington style, but nonetheless, she was a person of remarkable sense of how the First Lady should behave, and she was totally protective of Ronnie, and the same was true the other way. There was this little dust up in I think '87 about the fact that she used an astrologer, and people in Washington who couldn't attack Ronnie were always thrilled to have a chance to attack Nancy because that way they could at least cause some pain in the Reagan household. And so it became a thing for a couple of days. And I did this floor speech and just said how utterly, totally stupid it was that, you know, Ronald Reagan was not being, you know, guided by an astrologer. and that to do this to Nancy was just really demeaning, and the kind of thing that makes politics so unpleasant. And the next day I was back home and actually in Bremen, Georgia, at the high school, talking to the students, and all of a sudden the principal came up on the stage and said, "The White House wants you."
Huh.
Which of course is just great drama if you're a member of Congress.
Yes.
So I said, well, can I use your office to take the call? I went there, and it was the president. He just called to say, "I want to thank you for standing up for Nancy," and
wow.
I'm personally very, very grateful. And it told you how much it meant to him to be protective of her.
Yeah. Mr. Gingrich, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with
yeah.
us. I would love to get you to comment also on the state of affairs in the Republican Party here as we're approaching, where are we now, March 7th. We've got Super Tuesday behind us, Super Saturday behind us, Michigan coming up, Florida coming up next week. And based on the latest results, Marco Rubio, other than Puerto Rico and Minnesota, he hasn't been able to secure a win in any of these states. He wants to hold on for his state, but it almost seems as though his strategy is sort of following the recommendation of Mitt Romney, which is let's bring this thing to a contested convention. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with getting to a contested convention. We haven't had one on our side since 1952, but there's nothing illegitimate about it, and it would actually be extraordinary theater. I mean, think what the ratings would be like. So I started. I mean, I get tired of people who are afraid, who wander around wringing their hands and worrying. We have an extraordinary Republican Party. We have more state legislators than any time in the history of the party. We have far more governors than the Democrats. We have absolute control of the House and are likely to keep it for at least another decade. And we have a real but shaky grip on the Senate and have a 50-50 chance of keeping control of the Senate. So I look at all that stuff, and then I had all these people wringing their hands. You have the most extraordinary insurgent in modern times in Donald Trump. You have one of the clearest articulators of conservatism since Bob Taft in Cruz. You have a very attractive candidate in Marco Rubio, who I think had a problem because he doesn't express anger well, and we're in a period when people are angry, and he's positive and up, sunny, and and he doesn't do anger well. So when his advisor said to him, "You have to attack Trump," he did, but it wasn't, it wasn't who he is. He wasn't able to sort of put it together the way that his advisors hoped he could. And then you have in John Kasich, probably the most experienced person in the campaign, the guy who spent 18 years in the House on armed services, somebody who led balancing the federal budget for the only 4 years in your lifetime, and somebody who's done an amazing job in Ohio, got 86 out of 88 counties running for re-election. I mean, you can't be stronger. So we have interesting people. We're doing interesting things. None of our people are being investigated by the FBI.
Yeah, that's right.
Start down that road and say this.
Let me ask, and we're out of time, but a quick answer to this one. Let me ask the question a different way. Other than those great candidates that you just so eloquently laid out, if a contested convention results in the nomination of someone other than those four, is that worth wringing your hands over?
Well, I don't think it'll ever get to that. I think the four guys who paid their dues are going to get in a room and say, "We're not going to let some clown come in here at the last minute who hasn't done anything."
All right.
I think they'll all band up. The four of them will gang up on the fifth person
against some clown show. All right, Newt Gingrich, great to have you, sir. Always
Thank you,
good.
sir. Always a pleasure.